You are never alone. You are never alone. Just reach into your heart and Allah is always there. You are never alone. You are never alone. Through sorrow and through grief, through happiness and peace, you are never alone.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a new episode of Family Issues. Dear brothers and sisters, every Muslim family faces the problem of sending their children in co-education institutions. At times, nowadays, mixed education institutions are not only in the non-Muslim countries, but also in many Muslim ones. Now, the main concern of the Muslim parents is what their kids would deal with, other students from the other sex. What are the consequences of having teenagers from both sexes mixed together for a certain period of time? What parents can do if they discover that their son or daughter is in a relationship with someone? How can we deal with the emotional unbalance and that teenagers have, and sometimes leads them to start having relationships? And how can they say no to the peer pressure and different seductions? Is it better to homeschool our kids in certain cases, and what if this option is not available? This is some of what we'll be discussing in this episode of Family Issues with our special guest, Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan, a renowned Huda TV presenter. Sheikh Ibrahim, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here. Jazakumullahu khairan.
It's my pleasure.
Dear brothers and sisters, Sheikh Ibrahim will be taking a short break now and then come back and start our discussion right away. Don't forget to call us on the phone numbers that will be appearing on the screen if you have any question for Sheikh Ibrahim. And also, don't forget to send us your emails at familyissues@huda.tv. Again, familyissues@huda.tv. Your comments and suggestions are always useful to us. All right, we'll adjourn the break and we'll start discussion right away with our special guest, Sheikh Ibrahim. As we start, we have to start, I guess, by taking the regulations that govern the relationship between men and women in Islam.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise and He's the most merciful. And because of that, when He created us, and He created us in a certain way, and He created us to worship Him alone, He created us in relationships. We're not created isolated, living in some isolated islands. We have relationships. It's very complex societies in many cases. And because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to achieve the goal of our existence, and that is to worship Him alone, also through the relationships. That's why there is halal and haram and so on. Many times people look into the haram and halal without looking at the goals of the sharia in large. One of the very principles in the deen of Islam is that the offsprings is something to be protected. The honor and dignity of a human being is to be protected. The rights of a child to be protected. So that's why a child, he has the right to have a father and a mother in a healthy relationship, in a family relationship. And because of that, because this is the right of a child that is weak, cannot defend himself, you would find the different rulings. One of which, there is a woman strange to a man. If it's not a blood relationship, if she's not the wife, that means there is regulations. Hijab is being practiced, lowering the gaze. There's no free mixing in a way that would cause, illicit relationships and so on. And all of that for the greater benefit that many people, they don't look at the bigger picture. But after all, we have to submit ourselves to the orders of Allah. So there's strict regulations, so that no evil would come out as a result of the illicit relationships.
Subhanallah. Sheikh Ibrahim, starting by asking the big question here, is mixed education at large allowed in Islam?
Mixed education, when you have boys and girls in the same class, this is something definitely not permissible whatsoever.
Starting from the age of what?
To be honest with you, from the upbringing perspective, something that they should be separated from the very beginning. Boys, when they're young, are different than girls, and girls are different than boys. Even people in education, they would see that. And the way that they would compete with one another, sometimes it hinders them to receive the proper education. But as far as haram and halal is concerned, when they're too young, they're not aware of what is the opposite sex is, right? Then it's okay for them to be together. But where is that age? It's not necessarily the age of puberty. It's the age once they are aware of what's happening and what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes it's different from one society to the other. A society where the children are being exposed to media and television and they know many things.
They grow up faster.
Right. That means
and it must be also be different, a different age for boys and girls. I mean, we girls grow up also faster.
Right. And that's why from the beginning they get themselves used to that the boys are together and the girls are together. And the boys will see that the girls in his life, or the women, is the mother and the sister and the blood relatives. And those who are not in that relationship, he has to adhere to some form of regulations, which is a healthy thing. So that once he reaches a certain age, it becomes a natural thing. He doesn't have to force himself or to impose something on him or her.
So that's the general recommendation. But what if there is a necessity to have co-education in areas where there is no such separate schools, for instance?
First, as a principle in our religion, there is no excuse in committing sins. So we have to agree on that. Once there is danger, we have to avoid the danger. And preventing the danger has precedence over bringing what is benefiting, which is a very famous principle in the deen of Islam. So there is a danger if there is a free mixing education system, and there is benefit in which they would learn certain things. We push away the harm. This comes first. If it's a necessity, it depends if we're talking about the West or in the Muslim countries. In the West, there are more flexibility when it comes to education. Homeschooling is something that is very well recommended in all different levels, especially, for example, in America.
With all its disadvantages, though.
Actually, there is actually more talks now and more weight now about the advantages of homeschooling. Because homeschooling is not just that the kids are staying at home, because you create for them a social environment for them. But when it comes to education, many researchers and papers to prove that homeschooling proves to be, in many cases, much better than the education in schools.
Allow us to get to that later and discuss it in detail. But say you're in a country, in a city, in a village, where there is no such homeschooling or no such schools that separate between boys and girls at the necessary age at which they have to be separated. How do parents deal with this situation?
Again, I guess the question, when they reach a certain age where they're supposed to be separated. To answer this question, if this was the case, it's a tough one. And for me personally, I don't want to be too extreme in the answer, but for them to find a place where they can be easily practicing their deen, if it's an option, that means they have to take that option. Because we as Muslims, we can never be humiliated when it comes to matters of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if it's a case where there is no other alternative, they can't go anywhere else, this is their place, and education is being something that is enforced upon them, then to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to do the best they can and to educate their children and to do the best they can to avoid the evil outcoming of things. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yes, so let's talk about this in detail then, Sheikh Ibrahim. So what are the consequences, first of all, usually, of having teenagers from both sexes mixed together?
See, you have the Prophet ﷺ, when he said in the authentic hadith, مَا تَرَكْتُ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ فِتْنَةً أَشَدْ مِنْ فِتْنَةِ النِّسَاءِ. There is no bigger fitna and tribulation and a test on men than women. Meaning, you have a fatin and a maftun. You have someone, there is so much, having so much desire, and this is something in our being as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, from both sides, and they're both inclined towards one another, right? And it's such a tough desire and tough force that sometimes one's mind is totally, oblivious of the outcome of things. So you have such an environment. then the outcome definitely has to be evil. And this is how the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He keep us separated. And something like that has been mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, even in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. You see what happened to Yusuf alayhi salam in the house of Al-Aziz and so on with his wife. It was in such a way that when they were alone, right, this is then the ways of the shaitan comes in place. So the same thing. People are together in the same environment. They see each other every day. They talk with each other. They soften their voice. There is no observance of hijab. Definitely the shaitan is part of this. And it starts with a look. They're not lowering the gaze. So many different things is being undermined. Definitely it would lead to what is worse. Even if it doesn't, I myself, I was in a mixed environment since kindergarten till high school. Even if something didn't happen, but it still creates with the personality of a person that is very loose when it comes to relationships. It's out of the respect to women, and for the women to respect the men. It's for them to live their own environment. And
usually is this a mixed environment for teenagers at school, for instance? Is it usually more tough on boys or on girls? Or
on both, but on both because of the recently where girls are being raised in a certain way through the media and things like this, they're being taught how to deal with boys. But in general, usually boys is tougher on boys than girls. But it's not a principle, it's not a theory.
Right.
But this is just an idea. But the point is, it's very tough for all of them.
So you would advise then parents to focus with their boys as well, not just with their girls as the first the first logical thinking comes.
No,
to
actually,
most
both are the same. And there is a statement that was said by Fatima radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, with regards to girls.
Daughter.
Right, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, if you are able that the girls do not see men and the men are not seeing them, do that. Meaning from the very beginning you raise them in such a way. And actually if this is done in a proper way, and if we have the means to do this, it's not something tough or strict or excessive or anything.
Right.
Just people have their own environment and it's very pleasing to one's heart. There's no tension, there's no depressions. There's so many different things, especially in the education system. People are not going to learn, but rather they're going for the competition and looking at the other side and with the fitna that is involved and sins and so on. And the education is just a part of it. So it's not really education.
Right. And the Holy Quran tells al-mu'mineen and al-mu'minat to
lower their gaze.
Yeah.
And when you have a free mixing like this, how are you going to lower your gaze? And see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the evil within our own self. Right? To protect your iman. So that when you stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you're doing the optional or the obligatory salah, you have the proper khushu' in it. It affects everything in our life. And again, it affects even the coming generation and the family issues and the strength of a family. The family issue in Islam is something that is very important and very sacred. Other parts of the world, they don't look into the family as something important. For us, it's very important.
What if the parents discover that their son or daughter is in a relationship with someone? What would be the appropriate reaction?
Right. 2 points to this. First, we need to take
measures to be taken.
To take all the means before something like that happens. And that's why the child, he goes through stages of life. We need to be witnessing these stages very well, and to apply the way of the Prophet ﷺ for every stage. One of which, for example, to get used to do what is good. As the Prophet ﷺ said in authentic hadith, مُرُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءُ سَبْعٍ. You order them to make the salah when they're 7 years old. Right? So once they're 7 years old, this is a very special age in which they start getting to know how to do things and to get used to do what is right. And from that early age, we take the means to separate them, and we take the means to educate them in the proper way and to make them love the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
The hadith again, and it says also
that you punish them, you hit them when they're 10 years old and they would lack in matters of the salah.
Right.
Why? Because there's no excuse then. Right. Because if they are doing the salah on time when they're 7 years old, once they're 10 years old, it becomes in their nature. they do it like that in automatic sense.
And again, there is continuation for the hadith, right? To separate.
No, and you separate them in beds.
Could we explain this to our viewers? Does it just relate to a boy and his sister, or girl and her brother, or is it about even from the same sex?
This is mainly for brothers and sisters, and brothers, all of them.
Right.
You separate between. They don't sleep on the same bed once they're 10 years old.
Right.
Way before the age of puberty.
Right.
And this is how to protect them from whatever evil that might
once
come.
The eldest is 10.
Right.
Not both.
Yes.
They don't. Yeah.
All of
once the eldest is 10, whether it's a boy or a girl.
Right. Then they all have their own beds. And if means are not there, right, it doesn't mean that they have to have a special bed that is high.
A special
from the
room.
ground.
I mean,
right.
right.
No, if means are not, like that way, that means their place of sleeping is separated from one another.
Right. Jazakumullahu khairan. Of course, when we said if the parents discover that there is a relationship, I mean, this could be just an emotional relationship, and it could be more than that. So can we talk about both cases, the appropriate measures, the reaction, how to handle it?
The case where there's already things that are being done in a wrong way, what I mean by that the children are in a mixed environment, and as we said before, that this is something that becomes inevitable, that they have to fall into something, and we have to blame ourselves and not necessarily blame them only, but talking about the reality of things. If this is already there, what to do? First, on a personal level, the parents should turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely and make dua and increase in matters of worship and repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all sins, and repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the choice that they took in which they put the children in such an environment. So there's a personal level work that has to be done. And the other work is to be done is to advise and to be lenient, and to if there is means for people to get married, definitely this is something that is important to be done. But we know the reality of many different societies where children are still young and marriage is something far away from them, which is a sad thing. But to advise and to be close to them and to be like friends with them, for them to speak about what their feelings and what they go through, so that they would find that support from the parents, and remind them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be patient. And the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great, and to warn them also of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the punishment for such relationships, it's not necessarily only in the hereafter, but it comes only also on the face of earth. This is one of the sins that a person might be punished still on the face of earth, by being deprived from getting married to someone that is righteous, that is good, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الطيبات للطيبين والطيبون للطيبات, that the righteous ones, females, are for the righteous ones, are the male, and the opposite. So if you want to have a righteous woman, be righteous yourself. If you want to have a wicked one, then it's accordingly. So reminding them and being close to them, and help them and tell them to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is definitely not an easy matter whatsoever, but we need to prevent it early on.
Of course, it's impossible to judge whether the reaction should be a very tough one, should be one of anger and rage, or should be one of of comforting and taking easy. I guess this would differ from the personalities of the kids themselves
and the environment. If you are in an environment where things are very clearly that it's strict, for example, in a country like Saudi Arabia, for example, there's no such as a way of being lenient and you continue with that. You just stop the situation like that, and you have many options, and things are made easy for you. But if you are in a situation where leniency is the only way, because the outcome is what's important. We look at the outcome of things. We look at the benefit and the outcome that brings what is benefiting for us. It's not a matter of being harsh or not. Sometimes harshness, if harshness in a decent way, of course, works and brings benefit, definitely it's a good thing. It brings benefit, right? But if it doesn't bring benefit and the environment will be against you, sometimes, for example, parents will kick the children out of the house, for example.
And then you could have even worse consequences.
Right. But if this, or boycotting them for a few days, can affect them in a positive way, what's wrong with that? So the parent has to judge this. What is their environment? What is the relationship between them and their children, and the personality of the child, And definitely leniency is a common situation here, because the Prophet ﷺ said ما كان رفق في شيء إلا زانه وما نزع من شيء إلا شانه, that rifq or gentleness, if it's present in anything, it would adorn it, and if it's removed from anything, it would, definitely cause harm and make it deficient.
ولو كنت فظا غليظ القلب.
And the Prophet ﷺ was the perfect example for us, lenient, and if he was harsh, as you said the verse, people would have been dispersed away from you. So we have to do that with our children, especially when they are in that age, being teenagers, where they have their own sense of personality, and they see their way is the right way, and so you have to go to their level and speak to them and constantly remind them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, it's very important for the parents to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakumullah khairan. What about monitoring? I mean, you did talk, of course, before, and you emphasize on the point of, trying to stay away from the danger zone from the very beginning. But again, in today's world, I mean, you could have a relationship built on social media networking sites. So what are the parents, required to do and regarding monitoring, if you will?
It's very tough in these days, but it's easy by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Monitoring is basically one of the basic principles of parenting. The parent has to be monitoring what the child is doing in a wise way, so that the child doesn't feel that he is being overpowered by the parents. So monitoring and being close to them, and making sure that the parent knows exactly what the child is doing, especially in the home where you have your way of doing things. You cannot just let the children be on the internet without any form of supervision and things like this. It has to be regulated. You filter out what they see and what they not see, and this is your right as a parent. And again, as one of the originations of Islam, he said, al-khayru ada. The khayr or goodness is a matter of getting used to it. If they get used to what is good, it become part of their nature. They won't have to suffer too much and to be patient too much to adhere to what is right.
So it's advisable then to have, one common computer or one common laptop, if you will, or one common iPad or whatever, for the entire family, so that they even would see what you work on and might get interested on stuff about information or knowledge or.
With that specific issue, some say that these types of instruments, or it should be in a place where everybody can see anything, and it's an open room, not something that is closed in a room in which a person can do whatever he wants. In a living room in which any minute, any time a person can walk in, and the screen is not facing the wall, but facing in such a way that nobody would do anything on it, so that you don't help the shaitan on them. It doesn't mean that the child will feel that he is being watched by the parents. They need to feel that they are being watched by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's just a way to make it easy for them, because shaitan comes, especially in these issues of relationship between men and women. It's one of the toughest things that might take control over one's even minds and senses and so on. So we have to make it easy. One front is that we protect them from evil, and on the other front we work to increase their iman.
Of course, this is easy to do, or might be easier to do when they are at a younger age. Definitely. But as they keep growing, as this adolescence keeps creeping, it's difficult. They want their privacy.
Right.
So what's to be done then?
Their privacy should be in such a way that there is no sins involved. And it depends again on the child and how the child is being punctual in performing the duties and performing the salah and being kind and so on. So it's different from one person to the other. But it's very important that once, for example, I've seen this in many cases where the parent was just not aware of these things and were away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then realized at one moment to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to change his life, and then he realized that the children are far away from the proper way, and then he come and ask what to do when it's too late. But there's nothing too late. As long as they're still alive, there's still hope. And that's why it's the personal level of the parents that many people don't see. And I want to stress that very much, because the guidance of the hearts is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And you cannot force anyone to be steadfast or not, because this is something, guidance is in the hands of Allah. So if a case like this, the parents need to work on themselves so much, and at the same time do the best they can, in which they would do what brings benefit, and never commit a sin to please the child. Never approve of a sin. Put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Subhanallah.
May Allah make it easy. It's not an easy matter, of course.
Indeed, and when you said it's not too late, just the verse إنه لا يأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون, this just came up to my mind. Sheikh Ibrahim, the teenagers usually have this emotional unbalance. I mean, we've all been through it. You've been through it. I've been through it. All our brothers and sisters must have been, those who have passed it have been through it. It has its emotional unbalances. What are, the parents here, it's a difficult job, and it's only Allah who can protect the children. It's not you, parent. It's Allah. But, again, when there are these emotional unbalances, how careful or how sensitive we should be in dealing with our kids.
The same thing when it comes to dealing with it early on and being close with the child early on before they reach this level. And if this didn't happen and they want to do something about the situation that they're facing at this moment, is to first turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make dua. Never undermine the power of the dua. And then with that sincere heart and the concern towards the child, that your main concern is for them to be righteous. It's for them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be pleased with them. And then, I guess, to be very close to them. There has to be someone, the issue of, or the subject of al-murabbi, the one that has this job of upbringing others, used to be present in the early generations of Islam. Even the kings and the khalifas and so on, they would have someone to raise the children. And this is something that we're lacking in many cases. And communities, even Islamic centers and things like that, they can create some jobs like this. Because sometimes when teenagers are in that dangerous age, they don't listen necessarily to their parents.
Specifically, sometimes, yeah.
So we need to find someone that can be close to them in their age, and they can relate to, and they can be very close to them in a way that they can talk to them and be close to them. And the Islamic center or the mosques or the masajid can be the best environment in this, in which they're attached to the masjid. They see their friends. They have their social networks there, right? And when it's time for the salah, they perform the salah. They learn some things in matters of the religion, and they play sports together. They do whatever, right? But that would take them away from the bad environments. So this is definitely, especially in the West, it's a very important thing for societies and communities to implement within their communities.
And you mentioned something I think is very important when you said they better be close to their age. So if they're, for instance, 5 or only 5 or 10 years older, this could be appropriate, because usually teenagers really look up, if I'm 15, I really look up to those 20 and 25s and can relate with them easily.
And that's why even in some places, and it's very benefiting and successful cases, where the teenagers are known in the community, and it will be, certain individuals will be designated for specific numbers. It's a very systematic and clear way. It's not just, why don't you go with this guy and hang out with him? No, the masjid knows that this person is responsible for 5. He monitor them. They hang out with him. They meet together in the masjid. So they have their own, youth time together in an appropriate way, without no sins involved. That definitely is a way to protect them.
It complements the role of the parents here, and especially that many parents today in this busy materialistic world, in many times, are so occupied with work, and have not enough time.
And this
for
is
their
definitely, we
kids.
need to also stress the fact that the issue of working on the matter early on. We're not created to just feed the kids. The responsibility of the parent is not just to feed the children and to shelter them. Anybody can do this. But the responsibility, yes, this is part of the responsibility, but the main concern is how to save them from the hellfire, how to make them righteous individuals, responsible. They can be benefiting and fruitful to their societies, and they don't just, many children now in the Western world, among the Muslim communities, you look at them when they're teenagers. I know cases where even teenagers had committed suicide.
Subhanallah.
The matter is a very serious one. Because actually they fall into the extremes of they see one environment at home and an extreme one in school and different. They have the imbalances that get them to be very extreme. So sometimes they get even worse than the children that in the same age from different communities and so on.
Sheikh Ibrahim, dear brothers and sisters, we'll be taking our break now. When we come back, we will continue our talk here on family issues. Please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Never alone, you are never alone.
Ask Huda.
Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to a new edition of Ask Huda.
I have two questions.
Please go ahead. You can read it in Arabic and you can also understand the meaning in your own language. The different tafsir and the interpretation of the meanings of the Quran are available in almost every language that exists on earth by the grace of Allah. The water of Zamzam is for whatever intention you drink it with. Salih from Egypt, his father has the way and he asked about how can he help him. Very good question.
Can we give a zakat to any of the dawah centers?
The ibadah or the act of worship is a part of the unity of worship. It has to be paid to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in accordance with the guidance of His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose whom He wills subhanahu wa ta'ala for His mercy, for His messengership, for the revelation to be revealed. This is not for the human beings to make that decision. If a person would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely, truthfully, asking for forgiveness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to forgive. We have as Muslims a duty, and that is to recite the book of Allah, to ponder over the verses, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to act according to the Quran. The mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses everything, but who would this mercy will be for? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent to all mankind. So the ummah or the people of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are all mankind since the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam till the day of judgment. Why waste our life without getting to know every verse in the Quran, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back. We're still with Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan discussing here our topic on in family issues. Please do not forget to call us on the numbers appearing on the screen, and also your emails. The number is 002 02 38 555 248 or 249. We hope you got it. And also, don't forget your emails at familyissues@huda.tv. Your comments and suggestions are always useful. Sheikh Ibrahim, you mentioned early on that homeschooling is an option in case you don't find the system of education that adheres to the directives of our great religion. Now, some would tell you that homeschooling would deprive the children, the kids, and and later the teenagers of this atmosphere of competition, which is many times useful, and also of activities and of making your way through the society. It will make you a bit isolated, maybe too shy. Maybe what would you say here?
Right. 2 points to answer this question. The first one, which is very important as a concept in our heart, when it comes to saving our religion, that comes first. Anything can be compromised except the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is the everlasting happiness or the everlasting misery. So once we have this as clear in our life, that we make a decision that I am going to save my religion no matter what happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open ways out. So this is, once we take care of this, then we look into the specific aspect of this. Even in the Western countries, they have system in which they would overcome these deficiencies. So the homeschooling is not just about the child will be taking some lessons at home, but they would, once in a while, they would go to a certain place to take exams, or they would make sure that they have some social activities. They, in some states, for example, that you have to bring the proofs that the child went to the museum, went to the zoo, things like this, so that the social life is there. Plus the Muslim community. This is, plays a big role in this. So the masjid, for example, and once the parents, they are in that situation, they would think and they would take the means to revive the duties of the Muslims in the Muslim community, in the Islamic centers. They would do something, because they would fear for their children that they would have these deficiencies, which is likely to happen if they don't do anything about it. So they would find this in the Muslim communities, competition between the children within the Muslim community. But again, there is system among the educational process in which it overcome these things, and it's very successful in many cases. And I've seen cases where children never went to school, and they were very successful in their college and aftermath and things like this. But putting the trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and read about it, read about the physical means to achieve the proper education and the mental health and everything, you would find even non-Muslims, they reached a very good level in how to benefit the children with the education system.
Right. Of course, there is no doubt that, when you put in your mind that if you follow Allah's and the Prophet's directives, then you are definitely going to be victorious on earth and in the hereafter. But sometimes shaitan comes to you and keeps telling you, well, again, if the kids don't go to school, if the boy, for instance, is homeschooled, he might be too shy. I don't want the boy to be too shy.
Right.
I want him to get used to, meeting society.
As I said, you can do that in the masjid, in the Islamic center. You can do many different things, but going back to the point of which you choose, many cases, I'm not saying everybody, many people, they choose to be in the environment that they are in. So if you choose to be in a place where you find it difficult to adhere to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's your choice. So the decision should be, and again, this is not an extreme or anything, but if you can save your children, your religion somewhere else, then do it. There's a very beautiful hadith, in which the hadith, the meaning of which, that if a person, or the best wealth of a person will be at a time when he's in the desert feeding, eating from the milk of a goat and things like this. The point of the hadith is, or the meaning of the hadith, that there's no excuse to undermine and compromise your matters of the religion. And in many cases, it's not that extreme. You can still be steadfast. And I've seen many cases where people are, in certain countries, they still adhere to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by the will of Allah and by the blessings of being like that, things will happen that is good to the children, inshallah. But we have to do something. We cannot be just depending on others.
Of course. But back to the issue of the mixed education. Again, you will have some parents tell you or talk to you about stories that we had our children in mixed schools, but alhamdulillah, because we raised them up in a good manner, and they had good religious education at home, and they went to the masjid with us and so on, and because we monitored them, then they came up fine. On the other hand, others sent their children to separate schools, and you would find, unfortunately, this all-boys school, escaping from class hours and trying to meet with all those from all-girls schools in streets. I mean,
that's true. It's true, but then outcome is not in our control. And guidance is not in our hands. We are ordered just to take the means. And that's why there's a big difference between someone taking the means for the children to be good and righteous. If they, after that, they they were deviated, the parent is not responsible, and he won't come on the Day of Judgment being responsible and being punished as a result of that. But if you didn't take the means, and then something bad happens to them, you are responsible. See, it's a
Very important.
very important point. So that's why when, for example, the parents, those who choose to keep their children in a mixed environment, or they go to the West and so on, yes, you can raise your child, and the child can be the most righteous person on the face of earth, and he lived and raised in the West. This is fine. But any fault in there, it is your responsibility. But if you taking the means, and he's among the Muslims and Muslim communities and so on, and then he deviated, it's not your responsibility. Nuh alayhi salam, his son was a disbeliever. So guidance is in the hands of Allah. But our job, what we will be asked about in the Day of Judgment, how did you raise your kids when they were not adults yet? How did you take the means to raise them in the proper way, and to get them to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to get used to the system of the religion of Islam?
Subhanallah, إنك لا تهدي من أحببت. Sheikh Ibrahim, you mentioned some good examples in the West about the mosque playing a positive role in the raising up of kids, of teenagers, and about activities, and some of us did see this in America, in Canada, and elsewhere. You had this mosque where you could go and pray Taraweeh, for instance, and you had a ping pong table down there, and you had a TV set that showed football matches for those who wanted to watch, and then eat, and then go and continue praying, and so on. We don't see this a lot in Muslim communities. Would you advise that this would be expanded in our Muslim countries, and how would that be done?
The role of the masjid definitely is such a big one. But to many of the Muslim countries, there are more variables than what we think it is. And sometimes it's the pressure, it's the governments, it's so many different things, and financial issues also. So definitely, if a masjid is a place, and this is what used to be at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it's the place where they perform the ibadah and the salah, and it's also the place where people are attached to. So all the different means, and whether it's any services, anything of benefiting to the community, to the society at large, you would find the masjid the place of it. The school, the education system starts from the masjid, and that's why this is something for people living in Muslim world, they would have different routes to create a good environment for the children. For those who are living in the West, it becomes a necessity, not just an optional thing. It's a necessity for them to have the Islamic school and the Islamic environment for the children. And many schools, mashallah, are being established in these places, but still it needs so much support. It's more expensive than the public schools, for example. So it's easier for a parent to put their children in the public school, but it makes it a necessity for Muslims to get together. Again, if they choose to be there, they have to take the means to save the religion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ قَالُوا فِيمَ كُنْتُمْ قالوا كنا مستضعفين في الأرض قالوا أولم تكن أرض الله واسعة فتهاجروا فيها. It's a case about those who died when they were transgressing upon themselves. They were in state of kufr, or to stay in a state of sin or whatever, and the angels were punishing them. They asked them, what was the matter with you? They said, we were oppressed in the land. The angels would say, wasn't the earth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala vast enough for you to migrate and to go to it? The point is, being oppressed or being weak, it's not an excuse. You have to be positive. Either you do something in your environment, or if you truly can't, go somewhere else and establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what we're saying is, it's not that case, it's not that extreme. People can have their own environment, people can have their own schools, but they need to be active. They need to not to be greedy. They need to spend from their wealth. They might think, well, Muslims are not doing that in the Muslim world, but you are different than them. You have to establish the environment for your children. So it's a necessity, it's not an optional thing, that the children are being left alone like this, to be raised by everybody except the parents and the Muslims and so on. They have to have their own schools. So this is definitely a very important call, that Muslims need to get together and take the means and support the Islamic schools, and to make them in such a way that it's healthy for the children. It doesn't have to be that they're teaching religion too much in the school. Just the environment is healthy.
Right. Sheikh Ibrahim, I think our viewers would like more in the final 5 or 7 minutes we have here to listen from you, if you will, on ayat from the Holy Quran and hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, talking about how we should raise up our kids and educate them.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran a verse that is a very important verse when it comes to teaching the children manners. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. O you who believe, shield yourself and your families. A blazing fire that the fuel of it is men, or are men and stones. So the call to the believers is to shield themselves and their families. So it's our duty, it's our responsibility. And the Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ, that every person is responsible, and every responsible person will be asked about his responsibility. So the man is responsible for his household, and he will be asked about his household. The same thing with the mother, and so on. So it's a matter that we will be questioned in the Day of Judgment about these children. We were the mean for them to be created by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are the extended thing in our life, and it's the next generation. And either we pass on to them what is good to save their religion, and they pass it on to the next generation. And the good news is, as the Prophet ﷺ said in many different hadiths, that your good deed is not just to yourself, but once it's extended to others, you get the reward for yourself, and for the one that did it, and for the one that did it, and so on, till the Day of Judgment. That's the mercy of Allah. Now, one of the intentions to have when a person gets married is to have a righteous son or daughter after him, that their dua would be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that when the parent is in the grave and in need of one hasana, one good deed, the son or the daughter will be there for them. And it's the real successful one is the one that when he dies, his sins dies with him, and the good deeds continuing to be after him. Many cases where the sins do not die with the person, sins are being continued when a person is raising the children to be deviant individuals. This is adding to his or her.
I wonder
own
what the
record.
parents of how the fathers and mothers of the dictators in our world would,
Right. If they were having a mean of raising them in an evil way, this is a huge responsibility on them. Again, it depends on did the parents take their means or not. And as we said before, guidance is in the hands of Allah. If this dictator or this tyrant was raised properly, right, but then he get deviated, it's not the responsibility of the parents. But if it was their work and their seed that they planted, it is not just his sin, it's their sin, and the sin of those who aided them. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, when he was in prison, and the guard of the prison, he told them, am I among those who help the tyrants? He said, you are among the tyrants, not the ones that help the tyrants. You are among them. He said the one that helps the tyrant that has a sin is the one maybe that can stitch something in his clothes, but you are working with the system of the tyrant to achieve tyranny and injustice and so on. So it's a very complex societies that we live in, and one deed that we do can affect us in our book of record in a way that we can never even imagine. A word can be affecting many miles away. People can even benefit from it, or people can act and commit sins as a result of what we say and what we do. So we have to be very careful, especially with our generations to come and the children. Every word counts, and there's no such a thing, and this is a very important thing, there's no such a thing of that the parent will tell his child, come sit, I will teach you now. There's no such a thing like that, or I would Arabbikal, meaning I would upbring you now. There's no such a thing. It's with our own actions. فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه.
Yeah, the role model.
Right. If the parent does not have it in themselves, how they can pass it to the next generation? So the homes has to be healthy. The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being mentioned. Quran is being recited. The father doesn't lie. The mother doesn't lie. They see the father and the mother, how they treat one another. And then they will be exactly a copy of them when they grow up, whether we like it or not. So we have to be the role models for them, so that we please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we save ourselves.
That last one is very difficult.
No.
I'm sure to many viewers
Right.
and to everybody here. I mean, because sometimes we say like the common fights that occur between husband and wife.
That should be away from the eyes of the children.
Right.
They should lock the doors on themselves and then, they fight,
Right.
argue.
Because it's inevitable, isn't
Right,
it, Sheikh?
right.
I mean, just to comfort our viewers as well.
But they have to control themselves. They have to agree with one another that we would never show that to our children whatsoever. It has to be kept, alone without exposing that to the children. There's a difficult stage on that.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Ibrahim. Really enjoyed it. Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan, renowned Huda TV presenter. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan. Hoping that you would give us your time in future episodes of Family Issues. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Ibrahim. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you for watching this episode of Family Issues. Our next date is same time next week, inshallah. Until we meet again, please keep your mails flowing at familyissues@huda.tv. Your comments and suggestions are always useful to us. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Never alone, you are never alone. Through sorrow and through grief, through happiness and peace, you are never alone. So now, as you long for your past, prepare for your future, but knowing nothing's gonna last. You see, this life is but a road, a straight and narrow path to our final abode. So travel well, O Muslim, and paradise will be your home. And always remember that you are never alone.